The year is 1945. Europe is weary. World War II has ravaged the continent. From the smoldering ruins of Stalingrad, the Soviet war machine had slowly, inexorably turned the tide of the war. By the summer of 1944, the Red Army was on the move. Operation Bagration, a massive Soviet offensive launched in June, shattered the German Army Group center. The Soviets advanced rapidly, liberating Belarus and eastern Poland. The German army reeled under the relentless Soviet blows. Their once formidable defenses crumbled. The road to Berlin seemed to open before the advancing Red Army. In the charred forests and shattered villages, the ghosts of war whispered of the coming storm. The German people, fed on years of Nazi propaganda, could no longer deny the reality. The Soviets were coming. Fear and uncertainty gripped the heart of the Third Reich. The countdown to the battle for Berlin had begun. By January 1945, the Soviets had reached the Oder River, a mere 40 miles from Berlin. The German capital, once a symbol of Nazi power, braced itself for the inevitable onslaught. Emanuel von Koenig, a young German sailor, arrived in Berlin's western suburbs that April. He was a reluctant soldier, caught in the maelstrom of a dying regime. Koenig and his comrades were assigned to the 12th Army under General Walter Wenck. Their mission to defend the city against the advancing Red Army. The task seemed insurmountable. The Soviets were battle-hardened and hungry for victory. The Germans, on the other hand, were exhausted, outnumbered and outgunned. As the Soviet artillery began its deafening barrage, Koenig and his fellow soldiers knew they were fighting a losing battle. Berlin was surrounded. Their fate was sealed. The city's defenses, a hodgepodge of Wehrmacht, SS units and hastily assembled Volkssturm militia, stood little chance against the Soviet juggernaut. The Battle of Berlin was unlike any other. It was a brutal, close-quarters fight, waged street by street, building by building. The Soviets, driven by a thirst for revenge and fueled by years of suffering, fought with a ferocity that terrified the defenders. The German people, trapped in the crossfire, endured unimaginable horrors. Bombs rained from the sky, reducing buildings to rubble. Food and water were scarce. Hospitals overflowed with the wounded and the dying. Amidst the chaos and carnage, stories of bravery and despair unfolded. Young boys, barely old enough to shave, fought alongside their fathers and grandfathers. Women and children, their faces etched with fear, sought refuge in cellars and underground shelters. The city, once a vibrant metropolis, had become a charnel house. In the heart of the besieged city, Adolf Hitler, the architect of this apocalypse, remained holed up in his underground bunker. Delusional and increasingly detached from reality, he clung to the hope that his armies could still achieve the impossible. He ordered General Wenck to relieve Berlin, a suicidal task given the overwhelming Soviet forces. Wenck's army, already engaged in heavy fighting to the west, never reached the capital. Meanwhile, inside the bunker, the atmosphere was thick with despair and paranoia. Hitler's inner circle, once blindly loyal, began to question his sanity. Goebbels, the propaganda minister, remained steadfast, his fanaticism unwavering. Eva Braun, Hitler's mistress, provided a strange solace amidst the madness. She was a fleeting apparition of normalcy in a world gone mad. The bunker, a microcosm of the dying Third Reich, was a place of shadows and whispers, where hope went to die. Section 5. Hitler's Last Stand. As the Soviets tightened their grip on Berlin, Hitler's grip on reality slipped further. He refused to countenance surrender, condemning the city and its inhabitants to a senseless fate. On April 30th, 1945, with Soviet troops just a few blocks away from the bunker, Hitler committed suicide. He took with him his wife of one day, Eva Braun. Their bodies were doused in gasoline and set ablaze in the Reich Chancellery Garden, a final act of defiance against the encroaching enemy. With Hitler gone, the remaining defenders of Berlin were leaderless and demoralized. Some units fought on with the desperation of cornered animals, while others surrendered en masse. The end, when it came, was swift and brutal. On May 2nd, 1945, General Helmut Weidling, the commander of the Berlin defense area, surrendered to the Soviets. The Battle of Berlin was over. Section 6. A City Divided. The fall of Berlin marked the end of the Third Reich and the culmination of years of bloodshed and sacrifice. The Soviet Union, having borne the brunt of the Nazi war machine, had emerged victorious, but at a staggering cost. Millions lay dead, their dreams and aspirations extinguished in the ashes of war. Berlin, once the proud capital of a mighty empire, was now a shattered ruin, divided by the victors. The city, and indeed Germany itself, was carved up into 4 occupation zones, controlled by the Allied powers, the United States, Great Britain, France, and the Soviet Union. The seeds of Cold War rivalry were sown amidst the rubble. The wartime alliance that had defeated Nazi Germany began to unravel, replaced by suspicion and mistrust. Section 7. The human cost of war. The Battle of Berlin, though short, was one of the deadliest battles in human history. Estimates of casualties vary, but it is believed that over 200,000 soldiers and civilians perished in the fighting. The Soviet army suffered heavy losses, but the Germans paid a far steeper price. Tens of thousands of German soldiers were killed, wounded, or captured. The civilian population, caught in the crossfire, endured unimaginable suffering. Thousands died from bombing, starvation, disease, and exposure. Countless others were left homeless and destitute. The physical and psychological scars of the battle would linger for generations. Section 8. Scars on the soul. In the aftermath of the battle, Berlin was a city haunted by ghosts. The stench of death hung heavy in the air. Rubble-strewn streets were eerily silent, save for the sound of shovels clearing debris and the muffled sobs of those who had lost everything. The survivors emerged from their shelters, dazed and disoriented, to face an uncertain future. The physical rebuilding of Berlin would be a long and arduous process, but even more daunting was the task of healing the wounds of war. The city was a microcosm of a fractured continent, struggling to come to terms with the horrors it had endured. The divisions sown in the aftermath of the war would shape the political and social landscape of Europe for decades to come. Section 9. A new era dawns. The Battle of Berlin marked the end of one era and the beginning of another. The defeat of Nazi Germany brought an end to the most destructive war in human history, but the victory came at a terrible cost. Millions lay dead, and the world was forever changed. From the ashes of war, a new world order emerged, one dominated by the rivalry between the United States and the Soviet Union. The Cold War would cast a long shadow over the second half of the 20th century, shaping the destinies of nations and the lives of billions. The Battle of Berlin, a microcosm of the global conflict, serves as a stark reminder of the human cost of war and the enduring power of the human spirit. It is a story of courage and cowardice, of hope and despair, of destruction and renewal. It is a story that must never be forgotten.